I think it was this year, I saw the governor tweeted about or did something about how graduation rates are at all-time highs in Michigan, and she was sort of celebrating that. And when I first saw that, it actually kind of scared me a little bit because it means that it's something like 92% of kids are graduating high school, but we've seen these numbers about literacy and math. And so can you talk about your takeaways from a figure like that?
So what that means is 66% of fourth graders cannot read at grade level. 69% of eighth graders cannot do math proficiently. And unfortunately, this was a problem prior to COVID, but COVID exacerbated it.
So it's not even really the teacher's fault. They haven't been given the curriculum tools that they need to help our kids. Thanks for joining, Beth. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So here at Michigan Forward, your title is long and complicated. Can you explain a little bit about what it is that you do here?
Yeah. So title is Senior Director of Strategic Operations, but in short, I get to focus on all of our policy topics that we care about, right? So we are a first principles organization focused on freedom, whether it's education freedom, worker freedom, energy freedom, election freedom, really diving into those policy topics and working in a collaborative fashion with other stakeholders in the legislature to do good things for the state of Michigan.
Okay, awesome. That I could not have explained that even anywhere near as good as that. So can you just talk a little bit about how you got here, how you got that role, and kind of like what your expertise is, what your bread and butter is?
Yeah. So when Michigan Forward was formed a little over a year ago, the awesome team at the Michigan Freedom Fund and the Great Lakes Education Project merged. I was the solo staff person at the at the Great Lakes Education Project. And had been focusing for 15 years with that organization, again, on education freedom. That was kind of my lane in the policy space, making sure that Michigan families have access to quality education options, the idea that all options need to be on the table for all families so that they can choose what it is their unique child needs for their unique learning opportunities. And we worked on things like early literacy, school accountability. Probably some of our prized moments were helping uncap the charter schools in the state of Michigan to make sure that that choice expanded. Again, the third grade reading bill, eighth ref report cards, and anything we can do to advance choice in education is the work I had done prior to coming to Michigan Forward.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think what we're going to be mostly talking about today is education and the state of education in Michigan. And we see this number thrown around a lot. The governor mentioned it in her latest State of the State. It seems like she's finally waking up to the fact that there's a literacy crisis, that Michigan has now fallen to 44th in literacy. And can you kind of talk a little bit about what that number really means for parents and for families here in Michigan?
Yeah, absolutely. So what that means is 66% of fourth graders cannot read at grade level.
Wow.
66%.
It's unbelievable.
And 69% of eighth graders cannot do math proficiently. So what that means is we, as a system, as a state, as the adults, have failed these kids for far too many years. And unfortunately, this was a problem prior to COVID, but COVID exacerbated it. And the system has not rebounded, has not really done anything to bring forward real data-proven policies that, if implemented with fidelity, would make sure that our kids could be successful. So absolutely give credit to the folks around Lansing, the governor, the state legislature are finally starting to pay attention to things like science of reading, which is a phonics-based learning, right? Kiddos learn through phonics, not whole language. And so abandoning what we used to do to make sure that teachers are adequately trained and prepared and that then they can go help kiddos learn in those really critical K through 3 years to have those fundamental building blocks of literacy support to be successful for the rest of their education.
So you just threw around a couple of terms that some of the people watching this might not be super familiar with, whole language and phonics based. So can you kind of tell us what those are and how did we end up using a model that wasn't working.
Yeah. So whole language became a thing. I'm not exactly sure when it started, but it's been a while. And in a lot of states, this wasn't a unique issue in just to Michigan, but it was this notion that kids could just look at a word and sound it out or figure it out, or look at an entire sentence and just sort of spot the words that they knew and from context look for the completion of the sentence. Phonics based, right, is, and I'll use my kids as an example who are older now, but I distinctly remember in early elementary school, they would bring home things called nonsense words. And what it was an idea that they were really influencing and working on those phonics and understanding what those vowel sounds are and how they sound with the consonants. And so that flow, the memory would be there as they go and sound out words phonetically. And so all of the data, I shouldn't say all, the vast majority of the data says that phonics-based learning, which is the science of reading, is how kids learn to read. And so if we are using that, that is going to instill a much stronger foundation for those kids.
Okay, great. And you've been working on issues like this for a long time. Is it sort of vindicating at all that it seems like more people are now paying attention than they were before?
In some degrees, yes, but it's also very frustrating when I think about, from my mom perspective, how many years of kids have slipped through the system. You know, there are school districts in this state that are graduating incredibly high percentages of high school seniors that can't read at a third grade level. And that's a complete tragedy in my mind, right? A whole system failure. So I'm incredibly grateful that we have this focus, but we need to be focused on the whole picture, and things like science of reading and phonics are key components, but accountability and literacy-based promotion, the idea that if a kiddo is fundamentally behind in that third grade literacy, that they don't be promoted to fourth grade reading, are very key components to states around the country that are being successful in seeing high percentages of success.
Right. Yeah. And I think it was this year I saw the governor tweeted about or did something about how graduation rates are at all-time highs in Michigan, and she was sort of celebrating that. And when I first saw that, it actually kind of scared me a little bit, because it means that it's something like 92% of kids are graduating high school. But we've seen these numbers about literacy and math. And so can you talk about your takeaways from a figure like that?
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate situation that probably the standards or the expectations have lessened so much that there may be some sense of just passing kids through to increase a graduation rate, which from my perspective really is setting them up for long-term failure, right? The idea that we don't provide those foundational building blocks for success, because as we know as adults, every aspect of our life revolves around the ability to read or communicate or problem solve. And when we don't give kids those tasks at an early age in reading and literacy and math, we have failed them.
Right.
And so the expectation of them becoming productive members of society is not really there if we're not giving them what they need at the start.
Yeah. And I mean, I kind of wonder how we got here, because the numbers just keep going down and down and down. The last results that we got from the M-STEP test was the lowest scores in the history of the test on English language arts. And when we think about previous decades, it felt like we were making such strides in literacy over time. More and more people were able to read, and adult literacy rates were getting better and better. And now it seems like we've done a total 180, and we're completely rehashing this conversation about how we teach reading. So how have we fallen so far, and what are some of the states that haven't fallen like we have? What are they getting right that we're not?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Again, we can't miss the fact that the colleges of education in the state of Michigan were preparing, I would say, ill-preparing our teachers to go into the classroom to teach literacy. So again, when you are focused on whole language or the things that don't prepare them for classroom management versus preparing them for classroom management. That is what was happening for these young professionals coming into the teaching world. And so they're not being prepared there. So how can we expect them then in turn to prepare the kids properly? Again, that whole language shift away from phonics, because back in the day, we used to have phonics-based reading before whole language. So the shift from that, I think, again, I don't want to belabor COVID, but in terms of education, that really was a critical turning point for continued slide, when the expectation was not that you needed to be in your classroom and you needed to be learning and present and hands-on for the learning that was happening, that it would be okay to just sit at a computer and fill out a worksheet and be done. That really perpetuated absenteeism and truancy and all of these problems, these chronic problems that we're seeing in Michigan education today. And unfortunately, our system is set up so that, the governor doesn't really have direct control over the State Department of Education. There's a brand new state superintendent now. You have a state board of education that is elected separately. So there's this incredibly bifurcated system that doesn't really hold one person accountable for the actions that happen. And I think that's a huge change. And then again, things like Mississippi or Tennessee or Florida, states that are in the top 10 of education performance, you see them with intentionality have accountability systems with real accountability and teeth to make sure that change happens. You see them focusing on third grade reading guarantees, where those kiddos don't move forward until they are ready to move forward in their early literacy. You see transparency across the board. You see educator evaluations happening in a collaborative way to make sure that professional development and the training that they get are critical to the support that needs to happen in the classroom. So it's a much more holistic approach than I think our system has been allowed to happen in Michigan.
It makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of headlines about Mississippi and the Mississippi Miracle. And one of the interesting things to me is that in a lot of other metrics, Mississippi is sort of near the bottom. They spend a lot less per pupil in education than we do. In terms of per person income, they're one of the lowest states in the country. In terms of unemployment, they often struggle. Mississippi, for a lot of people, had kind of been the butt of some jokes about just comparing to other states across the country. But now in education in particular, they have just skyrocketed in the rankings over the last 10 years. And so do you see them as kind of a blueprint to how we can get it right, especially since it seems like we have a lot more resources than they do to throw at these problems? How can we utilize that here?
Yeah, I don't think it's a resource problem. So as you had indicated, Mississippi is having these successes with significantly less dollars, maybe per pupil or in their entire system as a whole. So it's not a resource problem here in Michigan. We spend ridiculous amounts of money, over $23 billion on public education, K-12 education in the state. So money is not the answer. Again, I think our entire system is set up in a way that it is not allowing success in the classroom. So you have a department full of bureaucrats who are sort of running and believing that they, whether it's through administrative rule or interpretation of laws, can do certain things. You have a state board of education that unfortunately is predominantly Democrat elected officials who, again, unfortunately have politicized education in this state in a way that is not helpful to teachers or students. You then have a governor who is the executive of the state but doesn't have real authority over the department or that board. And then currently, a divided legislature that unfortunately has sort of been a yo-yo when it comes to laws. So I suspect that if we could calm everything down and just implement some things that would last and stay with fidelity, whether it was testing or evaluation systems or accountability systems, that if we were intentional about focusing on those things that support teachers and students in the classroom and left them in place for a series of years, we would start to see the type of progress that Mississippi and other states have seen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it feels like on some level we have the answer and we're just not getting to it, right? Like Mississippi has done all of these reforms that we can look at and we can sort of model ourselves after. We can look at this huge body of research that backs science of reading and evidence-based curriculum and all of these things that have been shown to work. And you even have stakeholders like the governor in her State of the State address saying, recognizing that there's a crisis, saying she wants to fix it. And so what is the real holdup here when it seems like everybody knows what the answer is and people want to get to the answer, but it's just not happening?
Well, there is an incredibly strong teachers union in the state of Michigan that has said on record in the past that their job is to support the adults in the system. And so when that's the mentality that's driving too much of the discussion around education, as opposed to our actual students who are the consumers of education, especially in K-12, that is where the rub comes. And unfortunately, our kids are paying the price far too often.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying to think about all the parents who are sending their kids off to school and they have an expectation that their kids are going to come home having learned more every single day and that they are going to hit these benchmarks and that they're trusting the system to prepare them, and it's just not happening in any meaningful way.
Yeah. And again, I think the vast majority of classroom teachers go into the profession because they dearly want to help kids learn, right? It is not a profession where you don't have a heart for service. But the system, as you said, is rigged against them and the kids. It's not providing them adequate training. It's not providing them the tools they need. When I say we spend $23 billion on public education, K-12 education in Michigan, a lot of that is administrative cost and bloat. So it's not seeing the classroom. And so the conversations really need to start shifting to how do we impact teaching and learning in the classroom, and what does that look like from the perspective of what students need and the training that teachers need to be successful to make that happen.
Right. And I think it's kind of interesting to me, too, that when you bring up the teachers' unions and kind of the fight they put up against some of these reforms, because in their opinion, like you said, it's bad for the adults in the room, regardless of whether or not it'll be good for the students. It's our tax dollars fighting our tax dollars because we're paying the teacher salaries, and then the unions take their dues out of the teacher salaries, and now they can do that directly right out of their paycheck. And then they're using that money to fight the reforms that are the best for our kids.
Yeah, it's incredibly infuriating that whether it's the unions or the school management groups, or as some of us fondly call them, the alphabet soup of education groups that represent the interest of the adults in this state. There are very few organizations that represent the interest of kids, and I'm incredibly grateful for the work we do at Michigan Forward to make sure that we're standing up for kids and families and their needs.
So, yeah, pivoting to the work that we're doing here and the work that a lot of education advocates, the people who are advocating for the kids, what are some of the things that you're excited about right now? What are the things that you think we can sort of look forward to?
Yeah, so the State House just passed a third grade reading guarantee bill, so I'm incredibly grateful for Speaker Hall and the House Republican leadership for focusing on that. They've got some school accountability bills they'll be working on. Obviously, this budget process will be key to make sure that the type of school a child attends does not mean they receive less money than a different student in just a brick and mortar school. So those are some of the most current ones. But probably the thing I'm most excited about is the Federal Education Freedom Tax Credit Program. This is a federal law that was passed a year ago. And if Michigan opts into this program, in the first 3 years, there's over $1 billion of privately funded donations that will go to scholarships for families in this state to use for their students' educational needs. It's something that, again, individuals through a tax credit donation will give that money. Families can apply for the scholarship, and they can use it for things like tutoring, transportation, technology. Think about those kiddos in the western end of the UP that don't have reliable internet access, right? This could really be a game changer for them. Again, the tutoring, when we talk about 66% of our struggling readers or 69% of our struggling students in math, a tutor could help so much to supplement the work that they're getting in the classroom. It's also a program that could be used for tuition if a family wanted to choose a different school. And then one of the key components that I'm pretty excited about in this is it will also cover two additional things: special needs therapies. So many families that have students with special needs do receive services through their school district, but need so much more supplemental support that they pay for out of pocket. These scholarships could be a game changer for those families to make sure those kiddos have what they need in terms of speech therapy or occupational therapy or physical therapy. And then we hear so much about the workforce development side of this. These tax credit scholarships are going to be able to fund certification and testing costs. So think of those high school students that are in a CTE program or are having some out-of-pocket certification costs to become a welder or an electrician. These funds can help those kids with their equipment or their testing costs to get them prepared to move into the workforce as soon as they graduate.
That is great. And I think, so you said right at the beginning there, if Michigan opts in. So what do we have to do to make that happen? What do parents at home have to do to make that happen? Is there a deadline that we have to hit? Is there a reason that we're not there yet?
Yeah, great question. So when the law was passed by Congress, it required that each state's governor opt the state in on an annual basis. So right now there are 31 states that have indicated their intention to opt in or have already opted in. Governor Whitmer has not yet opted the state in, but I'm cautiously optimistic that she will understand what this means for all students in the state of Michigan. And that these donations are going to happen no matter whether we opt in or not. So having the state opt in will make sure that those dollars can stay and support Michigan students. Timeline-wise, the law goes into effect on January 1st, 2027, but it is our belief, because there are elections all over the country with new governors coming into play, that there will be a pretty long runway for states to make a determination even well into 2027 to participate in the program.
Okay. And, I feel like I see, like every other week, I'm reading a new piece about this program, people advocating for it, people who, for some reason, are against it. And it seems like there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation out there about what this program actually does. And I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit. And when you read these op-eds or, these articles from people who say that they're in the education space, who are just bashing this program, what they're getting wrong about it or what they're not fully explaining.
Yeah, I think that the knee-jerk reaction from the opposition whenever you talk about education freedom or choice programs that empower the families to take control of those dollars to support their children, they instantly get fearful that somehow is going to drain money from public education and it's going to destroy public education as we know it today. Every single one of those points is factually inaccurate about this program. These are scholarships that are privately funded through individual donations. The great news for Michigan Public Schools is it will not impact our state school aid budget by $1. And it is available to almost all public school students in the state. There is an income threshold for the program, but our best estimates say about 90% of Michigan families will be eligible to participate in this program and request a scholarship. So the idea that this is going to support and supplement the vast majority of public school students in the state is super exciting for all that they can use it for.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like it would probably even be helpful for a lot of teachers in public education who a lot of the time are asking for just a little bit more support. Their students just need a little bit more help. And this sounds like something that can really supplement the work that they're already doing in the classroom to give them that extra help that they've asked for.
Yeah, far too often when you think about sort of that classroom and what it looks like, and let's just pretend there's 25 kids for round numbers, right? You may have a small number of kiddos that are kind of your high flyers and can kind of self-regulate the work that they're doing in the classroom. The vast majority of your kiddos are probably in the middle and need some core instruction time on the lesson, but we'll pick it up. And then there's going to be that segment that's struggling with the concept, whether it's reading or math or science, and needs some extra attention. So from the teacher's perspective, right, the ability to be able to influence all 25 of those kids gets mitigated if they have to spend so much time focused on bringing up the kids that are struggling on the concept, which is a detriment to the remainder of the students in the classroom. So I see nothing but positive benefits from the supplemental money being there to support the kids outside of the classroom, and that being such a weight off the shoulders of teachers who then can work more holistically with the entire class.
Right. Yeah, it's something that I really hope that we can look forward to here in Michigan, that I'm really hoping that, this sort of, I would say, correct side on this issue wins, and that the governor is able to see the benefits that it will provide Michigan kids, and sort of join the bipartisan effort, because there's governors, Democrat and Republican, across the country who are opting into this program. And I wanted to go back to what you talked about just a little bit ago, about the university education and how a lot of the programs haven't been adequately preparing teachers for what they should be teaching in the classroom. So it's not even really the teacher's fault. They haven't been given the curriculum tools that they need to help our kids. And it kind of brings me to the issues that Michigan State University has been going through, and kind of just a whirlwind of stories and controversies and scandals. And why does it seem like the trustee system for Michigan State University is so much more complicated than it is for some of the other public universities? I mean, you never really hear about something like this at Western Michigan University or Central Michigan University. It seems like it's just really honed in. So can you kind of explain that for people?
Yeah. So first, as a Spartan, it hurts my heart. And my kiddo is going to be starting there in the fall. So we are watching as a family very intently what's going on at the university. To that question, so there are 3 universities in the state of Michigan that choose their trustees or governing board through political party conventions. The rest of the universities in the state all have their governing boards appointed by the governor, right? So there's a vetting process and an approval process and an appointment process for the vast majority of public universities in the state of Michigan. Michigan State, the University of Michigan, and Wayne State University are different. And it really, the things that are happening at MSU right now, this unfortunate situation really begs the question that we should be not treating them differently. They should be under the same system as the rest of the universities who, to your point, are not functioning with these high-level press drama, all over their actions, and move to a gubernatorially appointed system for those 3 universities and put them in line with the rest of the schools.
So right now, it sounds like it's sort of just a partisan popularity contest for higher education, the people who run institutions of these specific institutions of higher education? It
is. And unfortunately, maybe Michael needs to come back to talk about the politics of this, but unfortunately, when you're nominating these folks, and the ability for most voters to understand with a level of knowledge who these people are and what their expectations are for their university is pretty minimal. So it becomes, like you said, a popularity contest or a straight ticket voting situation, which has not favored the Republican Party. Unfortunately, most of these boards are heavily democratically controlled, and Michigan State's situation is playing out in the press of what that means when they're not going to walk into a situation in good faith and negotiate with a president who objectively had the best interest of the students and the faculty at heart for what he was trying to do.
Yeah, and to me, a lot of this is even less about the partisan makeup of the boards, because if they're appointed by the governor, there's a chance that there's a partisan skew nonetheless. But it seems like there's no one really checking their education bona fides either. So even if they do lean partisan one way or the other, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have any particular knowledge about how to run a university. And it seems like that's kind of where we've gotten to with some of these trustees.
Yeah, and I think, again, the appointment process is fairly lengthy,
Yeah.
whether it's a university board or, the Mackinac Bridge Commission or any of the other hundreds of commissions that the governors have appointment capabilities to. The vetting that goes into that is incredibly thoughtful, and that's not a partisan situation, right? They are working with intention to make sure that on the Central Michigan Board or the Saginaw Valley Board or the Western Michigan Board, there are folks who can bring a skill set to the table to make
Right.
sure to advance, the causes for that particular organization.
Right. You bring up the Mackinac Bridge Commission, and I just had this funny thought of, like, why would I even want to vote for the person who runs the Mackinac
Right.
Bridge Commission? The idea that somebody who doesn't know anything about bridges would win their party's nomination, and now they're in charge of
Right.
the speed
I
of
hear
human
that's
engineering
one-
connecting our state.
Yeah, that's supposedly one of the coolest and cushiest appointments, I am told, because it
Okay.
affords you the opportunity to go up on the top of the bridge if you
Oh,
want.
I could
So-
never do that.
No, I wouldn't want to do
would
that.
absolutely terrify me.
I hate driving over that bridge.
Yeah, it freaks me out
So-
too. Yeah. So I think the speaker in the House has introduced a plan that includes changing how this happens. I believe there's a plan in the Senate as well, which of course it would require a constitutional amendment. So it's a heavy lift to get this change made. It would have to be bipartisan. But I've seen a handful of candidates for office mention this online, that they're against it because it's anti-democracy. Or do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I don't, other than if you're a candidate that is really close to your party's grassroots, maybe that's what's compelling that opinion.
Right.
But I think objectively, both sides of the aisle, right, Republicans and Democrats, recognize the situation that's occurring. And it just so happens to be at Michigan State right now, but
Right.
but it could be a different one next time, right? Is not healthy for that institution and the longevity of that institution and the prestige of that institution.
Right.
And quite candidly, party politics has gotten incredibly messy. And so the thought that the highest quality candidate is going to come out of those situations on either side of
Right.
the aisle, I think has folks in the legislature really searching for opportunities for change to make sure that Michigan citizens have a bigger say in what's happening.
Yeah. I think the anti-democracy argument is kind of, to me, it's a little goofy, because for most of the people that we vote for, I understand how they have an interest in my life and what they're supposed to represent. I don't attend Wayne State University. I don't have children who attend Wayne State. I don't live anywhere near Wayne State University, so I have no idea why I'm supposed to be voting for the people who run Wayne State University. Like, for a lot of people, I don't know necessarily what the dog in the fight is for these institutions of higher education, outside of the fact that they want, good educational opportunities for people who choose
Yeah.
to choose to go to college.
Yeah, but the notion that those three are treated differently than
Right.
the remaining, dozen plus other public universities in the state is a little backwards thinking, and it's definitely ripe for change
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask, we've talked about some things that are sort of going wrong in Michigan. We talked about some things that we're hopeful for here in Michigan. And we talked about this with Mike about when we did a kind of a segment on some of the bad statistics that Michigan is seeing right now, and how some stakeholders and some people in this sphere have a tendency, we almost view them as a box score, which is not the right way to look at these, because these numbers make up real individuals. So when we talk about education, there's a lot of parents out there are a lot of families out there who these are real issues that they're facing every day, and who they're frustrated, they're exhausted, and to them it must seem pretty bleak. And so I just wanted to ask, what are some things that people at home can be doing? A parent who watches this podcast and is frustrated that we haven't opted into the education freedom tax credit, or they're frustrated that their child is still learning whole language instead of signs of reading. What are some things that people at home can do to try to make the education system in Michigan better?
So I think the first thing is an engaged citizenry is so important across the board. And since we're talking specifically about education today, that first place that change can happen is to use your voice at your local school board meeting. Obviously, we don't want contentious conversations or yelling matches, but start attending. Start seeing what your local school board is talking about, right? Those are the people who, as a voter, you have elected to be your voice for your district's education or your community's education, presumably for where your kids are attending. And so being engaged at that most local level is where most change can happen. And I've watched it play out in my own community, right? When things have occurred or there have been public outcries on certain things. If everybody just takes a minute to pause and engage with the school administration and the school board, most of the time you're going to find resolution that will benefit the families of the district. So get engaged there. As it relates to the education freedom tax credit, if there are folks that are listening and think that this is just such an incredible opportunity for families across the state and they want those donation dollars to stay in Michigan, I'd encourage them to reach out to the governor and her constituent relations office and just encourage her to opt the state in, because of how much it will support Michigan's K-12 students. Outside of that, again, just being thoughtful and engaged at that local level. And if someone feels called to take that next step, school board elections happen every 2 years, and it's on a rotating cycle. So there are always school districts looking for candidates that want to be invested in developing what their school is going to look like and the curriculum and, the standards and expectations at that local district. So folks could certainly step up in that way too, if they felt called.
That's great. Yeah, I think I don't want people to feel helpless. I don't want parents to feel like there's nothing that they can do. And so those are some great options for parents who are really passionate to get more involved. And I think when we talk about making serious changes, like the serious changes that need to be made, a lot of it has to be parent driven. It has to be constituent driven. There has to be a push for change. And so I'm glad there's some ways that parents can get involved in that change. Yeah.
Yeah, far too often, I think parents are incredibly busy running their day-to-day life, right? Raising kids is not easy, and doing so in a modern day area where they're running to sports practices or extracurriculars or music practice or insert whatever activity or 5 your kiddo is involved in. You can lose sight of those ways that you can tend to feel helpless, but just being engaged at that local level and making sure that your voice is heard will have an impact, and then it will allow others to feel comfortable doing the same.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down and talking to me today. This was really fun, and I think I learned a lot, and I think the people at home are going to learn a lot. So thank you.
Absolutely. It's all for the kids.
Yeah, so make sure that you subscribe so you can see more of our content. Like the video to help boost it so that other people can see it, and leave a comment if you like what we do or if you disagree with what we do. No matter what, it's going to help our algorithm. So